Hello board game brothers and sisters, and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and Gamefound over the next week. If you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the upcoming campaigns, but before we get started, I do like to go over some news and announcements that I just found out about over the past week, and I do got a few to go over here for you. The first one is that Stonemaier Games did just announce their next upcoming game, and this one is called Vantage, and this one is designed by Jamie Stegmaier, who is the owner of Stonemaier Games, and this is going to be offering a cooperative roguelike experience where players have crash landed on an uncharted planet, and you're going to have to work together to try and complete whatever objectives you're trying to complete in order to win the scenario. But when you crash landed, all the players were separated by vast distances, which is going to limit the amount they are able to help each other. If you are interested in this one, you will have to either subscribe to their newsletter to get updates, or just stay in touch with your local friendly game store, because Stonemaier Games don't launch on any crowdfunding platforms, but I did want to mention it just because I know a lot of you might be excited for this one. And we do have a launch date for the next game being offered by CMON, and this one's Degenesis Clan Wars, and this one is a semi-cooperative game that takes place in a futuristic post-apocalyptic world where players are fighting for the survival of humanity. I haven't had a chance to look into this one in too much detail, but it does remind me a lot of their previous game known as Hate, which was a game that was only offered on crowdfunding. I don't know if this one's going to be the same, but if you are interested to learn more about this one, I will be covering it in more detail during the week of its launch, so make sure to subscribe down below if you haven't already. We also have a launch date for the game Mythic Battles Isfet, and this is the third in the series, so I did want to mention this one for anyone that might be a fan of the series so far. And this one's going to be launching June 4th, iterating on the previous designs and offering you some new twists to the skirmish experience. And finally, I did just want to give a quick mention to the TCG Invitationals that are actually going to be going on the same day that this video goes up, which is Saturday, April 27th. But this is going to be offering a bunch of tournaments for all sorts of trading card games, including Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Hearthstone, Digimon, Keyforge, and even Mindbug, which is on Kickstarter now if you want to check it out. But this whole invitational will be streaming live on YouTube, and there's going to be players from all over the world competing in this tournament, so you can go ahead and root for your home team. As always, I do like to give a quick mention to Alex over at Boardgame Co. because him and I do work together keeping track of all these upcoming campaigns, and I do these every single week, but Alex puts up a video at the start of each month going over the heavy hitters for that month and giving you a bit of a glimpse of what's to come. So if you are interested in that, definitely check him out. But he also has a ton of other videos as well, going into reviews, playthroughs, and general commentary on the industry. And if you're interested in historical war games, which is an area that I don't dive too deep into, and there are other crowdfunding platforms that do offer these games, you'll definitely want to check out Zilla Blitz because he covers all of that, and he also puts out a video every month letting you know of what's to come. And I guess we can't forget about those retail games, and if you are interested to hear what's coming to retail, you can go ahead and check out QVO Games or Grant Lion, or just check them both out because they both offer their own spin on announcing these games, and you can find links to all of these channels in the description down below. But that is everything I have for an intro, and we got like 25 games to cover this week, so there's definitely a lot to cover and a lot of really cool games that I'm pretty excited about, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on April 29th, and this one is called Without Our King, and this one's a competitive game of political and area control, where players are going to be constructing walls and castles out on the map in order to defend their territories, but then also ensuring that their counselors are elected into council to grant them more control over the game. Something that's interesting about this one is that each player is going to be controlling their own asymmetric faction with their own special abilities, but then players are also going to have their own unique objectives that they need to complete in order to win the game. The game plays over a series of rounds, starting with an income phase, and then players using that income in order to complete different actions like gaining new cards that can help on and off the battlefield, and then also building and defending those different areas on the map, and then influencing the elections. I don't have a whole lot more info on this one, but if you do want to learn more about this one, if it does interest you, you can go ahead and check it out, and I'll have it linked in the description down below. And launch on April 30th, we have Kinfire Council, and this one is the next edition in the series of Kinfire games, and each of these games actually play very, very different from each other. We had Kinfire Chronicles, and then Kinfire Delve, and now we have this one, which is a worker placement game where you're going to be placing your workers out on a city board, taking different actions, but then also trying to gain influence so that you can dictate the scoring conditions and the different opportunities that come up throughout the game. Something that's really cool about this game is that each player is going to be playing as their your own asymmetrical council member with their own special ability, but you also have your own unique worker board, which is going to grant you with all sorts of different workers with their own specialties that might grant you different benefits or bonuses for using those workers in certain ways. And one thing I should probably say about this game is that this is the best image I could find of this game, which is just one that I pulled up from their Instagram. So most of the images I'm going to be going through here are from their designer diaries and things like that. So if you do want to see what this one's actually going to look like, you probably want to check out their Kickstarter. And also you'll probably want to check it out because this game looks like a ton of fun. It looks like a really solid design, and it is one of my picks of the week this week. And I say one of them because there's 25 games launching, and yeah, I can't just pick one. But the way this game actually works is that players are going to be competing to win the most favor within the city by placing their workers out on the various locations out on the city board and then taking the associated action with the goal to try and help the city as much as they can. And players are going to be gaining victory points based on their contributions. And something that's really neat about the way that the city board works is that all the different locations are actually going to be populated with different tokens representing the actions that you can take there, and these can be upgraded throughout the game. I'll come back to this in a minute here, but this can also be done on your own personal player board in order to change the way that your workers behave as you put them out and take the various actions. A couple other things to note is that there will be 2 decree cards drawn each round, with just one of those going into effect at the end of the round, and these can cause all sorts of effects and changes to the game, and players will be able to influence which one becomes active, and of course you're going to be trying to get the one that benefits you the most. But the other thing that you'll want to be aware of is that the players aren't the only ones trying to win the favor of the people, because there's also the neutral cultist faction. And every round you're going to be drawing 3 of these tokens, and they're going to have different numbers on them, and that's where they're going to be put out on the board, and they're going to be completely blocking those action locations. But also for each one of these that you draw, you're also going to be drawing one of the crisis cards and then putting it out on the crisis board. And I'll come back to this in a second here, but the more that the players let the cultists' efforts go unchecked, the more the cultists are going to be making progress towards winning the game. And if the cultists get the most favor of the people, then all the other players lose the game, unless you make the required efforts in order to gain control of the cultists. And if you do that and the cultists win, then you are going to be winning the game instead. This is a really neat mechanism where if a player thinks that the cultists might have a chance at winning, they might want to try and accelerate that effort, but then simultaneously try to gain control of that faction. But in order to do any of this, players are going to be taking turns assigning a worker from their own personal player board out to the various locations on the city board or onto those crisis cards. Some locations are specific to certain types of workers or grant bonuses to those workers, but the different actions that players can do is gain resources or money, arrest cultists, or remove them from the board, and you actually do get to keep the cultists as a resource for other actions. And the same thing does go for the crisis cards, so if you do have the resources to meet the requirements of that card, you can actually put your worker onto one of those cards as a worker placement action, and then that's going to be preventing that card's negative effects from coming into play, and you also get to take that card into your possession and use it as a resource for other actions in the game. But there's also actions that you can use to grow crops for the people, influence which of those decree cards might come into play, and also upgrade the individual worker locations themselves. And what's really nice about this is that not only does it improve the action of that location, but you also gain a benefit anytime another player uses that location afterwards. Like I said, there's also an action that allows you to upgrade the workers on your own personal player board, changing the benefit that you get for using them. And there's also various actions that can grant you special cards with some one-time use abilities. Each time you take an action, you also get to take a bonus action where you can spend resources in order to help build the lighthouse, which will grant you different bonuses and victory points throughout the game as well. Or instead, you could donate resources to help meet the needs of the people. This can also offer you some different benefits, especially depending on your special abilities, but this is normally going to be granting you some victory points. The round ends once all the workers have been placed, and then the rounds continue like this until the end of the game. And then at that point, the player with the most victory points wins the game, or if the cultists won, then either they win, or if one of the players was able to gain control of the cultists, then they would be the ones to win the game in that case. But if you are interested in this one, and it does look very interesting, definitely check it out, and you can find a link to it in the description below, and of course you can click to get notified. Also launch on the 30th, we have GACHIJO, the 4 Ninja in the Castle of Treasures. And this one is a campaign that I thought was launching a couple weeks ago, but it got pushed back until now. So I'll just go ahead and roll my previous footage for you now. And this is a game where players are different ninjas tasked with a mission to collect certain items, and the player that does that first is going to be triggering the end of the game, but the player that actually wins this game is the player with the most victory points. You're going to be getting different victory points for different items that you're able to collect, because you only need a minimum amount of them in order to complete your mission, but if you do get more of them, those will be adding to your victory point potential at the end of the game. And this is a game where players are going to be moving their ninjas around the board and interacting with different elements as well as the other ninja, but a really interesting, unique mechanism of this game is that you can actually modify the board itself, because underneath the board you have 2 sliding pages, a blue one and a red one, and you'll be able to use your movement actions in order to slide those a number of spaces, and that allow you to actually modify the structure of the board and create new paths that weren't there previously. On a player's turn, you'll be able to make 3 manipulations of the board, and this is really interesting because not only are you trying to set yourself up for success, but since all players are on the same board, any changes that you make are also going to affect your opponents. Ninjas can move freely within the area that they are confined in by the walls, but there are also staircases that are on different areas of the board, and you can use those to kind of teleport to another area. Of course, you're doing this to try and get your ninja in the same area as one of the items that you're trying to complete in order to complete your objective. But some of the items that you need to gain in order to complete your objective are not necessarily items that you can just go ahead and pick up. Instead, they're sort of badges that you earn when you engage in combat with an opponent and win the battle, or even summon a creature out on the board. And to engage in combat in this game, you're going to have to pick up a weapon from one of the weapon tiles. You'll be able to use this against any opponent that's in view, and assuming that they don't have some sort of token to defend against it, you're going to be gaining a shinobi token, but you're also going to be able to take a treasure from them, and you're also going to be sending them back to their starting position. In order to summon a creature out on the board, you're going to have to slide the 2 sheets so that these blue and red icons overlap to create this symbol. Whenever you do that, you're going to be gaining a creature that you'll be able to put out on the board, and each creature is going to have its own set of movement points, but you'll be able to use that creature to also attack opponents, which will force the opponent to lose one of their treasures and will also gain you a summon token. And like I said, these tokens might be required in order to complete your mission. There's also an icon out on the board that players can land on that allows them to draw a tool from the tool bag, and these can allow you to do things like move through water, move across the rooftops, or even climb over walls, and they can also allow you to hide from attacks. When a player completes their mission, they have to raise their flag up to let all the other players know, but then to trigger the end of the game, they also have to get back to their starting position. This gives the other players the opportunity to try and steal different items from them or cause them to lose items, or just try to focus on getting more victory points themselves so that when the end of the game is triggered, you might stand a chance. But once the game does come to an end, each player is going to be tallying up their victory points, and the player with the most victory points wins. And if you want to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description down below. Also on the 30th, we have Roller Coaster Park, and this one is a competitive roll and write where players are going to be building up their own theme park, attracting different guests, and trying to make the most money. This is a game that plays over 20 rounds, but what's really cool about this game is that players are going to be rolling 2 dice and then using those dice in order to build their attractions. The way that works is that you're going to be choosing 1 die in order to determine which section of your board you're going to be activating. Then you're going to be using the other die to determine the option within that section. This means that if at least one of the dice rolled was a 1, you could use that to build a stall into your park, and this is going to increase the amount of guests that you can have, but also the amount of income that you generate per ticket. If a 3, a 4, or a 6 was rolled, that's going to allow you to build the various rides, but then the sub options within that are all different shapes that you'll have to draw onto your own personal player board, and each space within these shapes actually acts as a location where you can keep one of your guests. So this is another limiting factor to the amount of guests that you can actually fit in your park. Of course, for your guests to actually get to the rides, you're also going to have to build paths, so you'll have to roll a 2 in order to build any of those, and then rolling a 5 allows you to build different corporate buildings, which will grant you with different benefits and ongoing abilities. A really neat thing here is that if you don't want to do any of the actions, any die can also be used to attract guests to your park. But the thing with this is that there are different types of guests that are interested in different rides and attractions, and depending on the value you use to spend on that action, it's going to determine which type of guest you get, and you're only going to be able to assign those guests to those particular types of rides. And if you don't want to do that action either, you can always choose to pass, which will just grant you with $2. But the game continues like this, and then the player with the most money at the end of the game wins the game. If you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description down below. Also launch on the 30th, we have a reprint for the game canvas and all its expansions, and there will be some new cards added to the game as well. But of course, with all this content, you will need a way to store it, and that's why they're going to be offering a big box solution in this campaign as well. But this is a game that I did cover during its previous launch, and I did get into how the game plays and I think a couple of its expansions. So I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now if you want to know how the game plays. And of course, you can check out the campaign. I'll have it linked down below. And the way that this game works is that the game uses see-through cards that each have an image on it, and players are going to be combining up to 3 of these to create their own work of art. Then they're going to be sliding that into a sleeve that has some sort of artistic background on it to pull it all together. Players are going to be combining different icons on these cards in order to score victory points within the cards themselves, but then there will also be different objectives that players are going for in order to try and score even more victory points. Players will be gaining their cards from a row in the center of the table, and you can take any card that you want, but the leftmost one is free, and any card that you go right of that card, you're going to have to add a token to. And of course, if you take a card that has tokens on it, then you can gain those tokens. And this expansion is going to be adding one more layer to your works of art because it's going to be now adding frames that you can mix and match with your different art pieces, and pairing the appropriate frame with the perfect work of art is going to add another puzzle for players to consider. And of course, the expansion will also be adding some new cards that you can mix into the game, and you will be able to get the core game in this campaign as well. Also on the 30th, we have an expansion for another game that I did cover in the past, and this one is for Fractured Sky, and this is going to be the Rift expansion. This is going to be adding new types of Starfall into the game of different colors, which incentivizes players to try and collect the Starfall of the same color, because that's going to be allowing you with different special abilities that are going to allow you to gain insights as to what the other players are trying to do, and also encourage or discourage more conflict in the game, whichever you prefer. And if you do want to know more about how this game actually plays, I'll just go ahead and roll my previous footage for you now. And this is a competitive game where players are going to be using area control as well as bidding and bluffing in order to try and score the most victory points. Because in this game, there is a type of resource that has crashed down from the sky, and this is known as Starfall. And players are going to be trying to collect these because each one of these is going to be worth victory points at the end of the game. And this special resource is going to be appearing in limited quantities in specific regions of the board. But players aren't going to know exactly which regions these are going to be because this is all going to be determined randomly by a draw of a card. There's going to be one card that appears at the start of the game that's going to be visible to all players, and of course that's going to reveal one of those regions, but then there's going to be a card associated with every single round, and those aren't going to be revealed until that round, so players won't know where that region is until they either get to that round or if they use a special action to peek at that card. But that's not the only card that's going to be revealed each round, because there's also another card associated with each round known as a goal card. You'll be able to use your abilities to peek at this one as well, but of course, if you're able to fulfill the requirements of that card at the moment that it's revealed, then you're going to get some special bonuses. And the way that this game works is that each player is going to be starting the game with some starting resources as well as a player screen, and then they're also going to have a fleet of ships, with some of those ships being numbered from 1 to 10. The numbers represent the amount of influence that a ship has, and you're going to be trying to get those ships out onto the main board in the different regions, because whoever has the most influence at the end of the round is going to be gaining the main benefit of that region. And of course, if there is a Starfall resource there, then if you have the most influence, you're going to be the one gaining that victory point. But this game plays over a set number of rounds, with players taking turns paying resources in order to perform an action. And like I said, one of those actions is to peek at one of the hidden cards. This is going to let you know either the next region where a Starfall is going to be located, or let you know the objective for that round. And of course, if you look at this, you're going to have that full information. Then the other players might be able to infer what information you gathered based on the actions that you perform. So this could work for or against you, because it also gives you the opportunity to bluff. Because another action you can do is to place out your various ships in order to gain influence in those different regions. And you have two types of ships. You have your main ships that are going to be numbered from 1 to 10, and these numbers are hidden on the bottom of your ship and aren't revealed until the end of the round. But then you're going to have your secondary ships, which just add one more influence to that region. You're also less limited when it comes to putting these ships out, so they are sometimes the better strategy. But another thing players can do is to build various buildings, and you're actually going to be building these between the different regions, and this is going to give you bonus bonuses in any of the regions that that space is connected to. So one of the buildings you can build is a fortress, which is going to give you 1 extra control for each region that it's connected to. And the other building is the market, which works exactly the same way, but instead of giving you extra influence, it's going to give you extra resource generation in each of the connected regions. At the end of the round, the secret objective for that round will then be revealed, granting any bonuses to the players that were able to fulfill it. And then you're going to be resolving each of the locations to determine who has the most influence there. Then that person is going to be getting the main bonus, while the other players get a secondary bonus, or maybe nothing at all. At this point, all the ships return to the players, but any buildings remain in play, and the rounds continue like this until the end of the final round, and then the player with the most victory points is going to win the game. And if you are interested in this one, I do recommend checking out the campaign, because almost every single component is going to be upgraded and deluxified, which you're not going to be able to get in the retail version. And this one does go the extra mile, because each of those ships are going to have a magnet in them, which allows them to connect to an influence token when you go to put that ship out on the main board. As always, if you're interested in this, I have links in the description below. Also on the 30th, we have Epochs Course of Cultures, and this one is a competitive civilization game that plays over 3 different ages. And this one is also my own personal pick of the week, because I think this one looks like a fantastic design. And it also reminds me of one of my favorite games of all time, which is Nations, which if you haven't played this game, it's such a classic and I definitely recommend it. That being said, these games are very different from each other and will give you a very different overall experience. I just do think there is a fair bit of overlap with certain mechanisms, and there will be a similar feel with certain aspects of the game, and obviously they do share a similar theme. But in this game, players are going to be each playing as their own asymmetrical nation with their own special actions, and each player is also going to be starting with a hand of invention cards that they're going to be using throughout the game. Players are going to be using their actions to explore the world, expand their influence, build different settlements and wonders, create inventions, and build and deploy their military units. The main map's actually made up of a bunch of different modular tiles that are face down at the beginning of the game, but then on your turn you're going to be gaining an invention card from the next era, which means that it's going to be a little bit more powerful, and I'll come back to how those work in a second here. But then on your turn you'll also be able to choose one map tile to flip face up, and then you'll also have to pay for any military units that you currently have as part of your nation. After that, you can do one of 2 things. You can either build an invention and then perform one action of your choice, or instead you can perform 2 actions of your choice. And one thing to note with building inventions is that you do have to meet the requirements in order to build it, but then it's going to be granting you some special ability for the rest of the game, and each invention does generate a resource when it's built, and it's going to be granting both you and the player to your left that resource. Another thing to note about the inventions is that you do have to build 3 within each round, and there's only 6 turns within a round, which means that if you chose to do the 2 actions for your first 3 turns, you're going to be forced to build an invention for your final 3 turns. But when you're not building inventions, you can perform all sorts of different actions, and a lot of these do come with their own associated costs as well, but you can claim land with different influence cubes, build cities on the land you own, or even build trading posts on opponent cities. And what's really neat about interacting with the different areas out on the main board is that it can grant you with different resources, but it can also move you up these supply and demand tracks, which will grant you with different magnitudes of benefits depending on where those tokens are. But there's also actions that allow you to move up research tracks to gain the benefit of the space that you choose to move to on that track. And you can also build wonders to gain more influence cubes into your supply, gain more culture out on the culture board, and also gain a special ability. Culture comes into play in a few different ways, but mainly it's going to be determining what type of government you can have for your nation, and there is an action you can take in order to change your government, and depending on the path that you take, it's going to determine which options you have to choose from. The cool thing about upgrading your government is that each one does come with its own type of resource generation or special ability, and there is actually a production action that allows you to gain certain types of resources based on the form of government that you currently have. But then there is our final action, which allows you to gain or upgrade your military units, which is both going to be determining your strength as well as any terrain advantages. This is really cool because at the end of your turn, you can optionally attack anyone that's adjacent to you, And anytime that you do that, you're going to be discarding any trading posts between you and the person you're attacking. But then you also do gain this Warmonger token if it was an unprovoked attack. And what I mean by that is that they did not attack you first. This token comes with certain restrictions that are going to affect you in other aspects of the game. And also, when you have this token, anyone can attack you without gaining a Warmonger token themselves. Combat in this game is resolved using dice roll, and you're going to gain a certain amount of dice depending on your strength, but then you're also going to be gaining additional dice if you do have advantages in the terrain where the combat is taking place. Winning battles can, of course, gain you victory points, but can also sometimes allow you to remove opponents' influence or buildings and then replace them with your own. So this is a really nice way to try and get into certain territories that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. But the game continues like this over those 3 ages, with each age having 6 turns per player. Then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game, and there will also be some endgame victory points granted depending on which players are further ahead in certain areas. Any resources that players still have at the end of the game can also be converted into victory points as well. If you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down in the description below, and of course you can click to get notified. Also on the 30th, we have Like, Cain, and Abel, and this is a trick-taking game for just 2 players, where players are going to be using these dual-suited cards, because one side of the card is going to have a red value, and the other side is going to have a yellow value, and players are going to be dealt a hand of cards at the beginning of each round, and then you're going to be choosing one of those cards to put down in front of you, sort of as a bet, because you're going to be betting that you will win the most cards of that particular color. So you're going to be choosing a card, and then whatever color you want to bet on, you're going to be facing that towards the center of the table, but you're going to be keeping it face down so that your opponent doesn't know. But what you will be able to let them know is which color that you intend to boast, because there's going to be a token located in the middle of the table, one side being yellow and one side being red, and you're going to be taking your meeples and then putting them on whichever side that you want. But if the color that you choose also matches the bet you placed, and then you also win that bet, then you're going to be gaining a special token that at the end of the game you can use to cancel victory points of your opponent. But the problem with trying to do that is that you're essentially letting your opponent know which color you're going for, and they can use that information to try and prevent you from meeting your goal. But the good thing about this is that you can bluff and deceive your opponent by trying to trick them as to which color you're going for, because even if the color you choose on this token doesn't match the color you bet, you still do get the victory points if you do win your bet. You're just not going to be able to get that token at the end of the game, at least for this particular round. But after the players have chosen their bets and then also chosen which color they want to boast, players are just going to be playing tricks until their hands of cards run out. The way that the tricks work in this game is that players are just going to be alternating back and forth, playing one card into a trick, and if you want to win the trick, you always have to play a higher value card than your opponent, and the color that you decide to play doesn't actually matter, so you can play either side of your card, but the tricks always resolve after 3 cards, and whoever played the highest card at that point wins the trick. And you still have to play a card into that trick, even if you can't play one of a higher value. And if that's the case, you just play it face down, but you're essentially burning a card from your hand that you're not going to be able to use for the rest of that round. After a player runs out of cards to play, then that's going to be triggering the end of the round, and then players are going to be checking their bets against the cards that they actually won to see if their bet was correct. And then if they also boasted that same color, then they're going to be gaining that special token that they'll be able to use at the end of the game. And the game continues like this for 5 rounds, and then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And if you want to check this one out, I do have it linked in the description down below. Also launching on the 30th, we have Adventures of Conan, and this one is a competitive game where players are going to be playing as Conan and his various allies, where you're going to be rolling different dice, getting different abilities and dice depending on the character that you're playing as. But the way this game works is that every round you're going to be revealing an event card, and that's going to reveal some sort of bonus or effect for that round, but it can also spawn various enemies and tokens out on the board. The round then continues with players rolling their dice through 2 different phases, but these 2 phases do work very differently from each other. The first one has players trying to complete different challenge cards, and there's going to be a bunch of these out on the board. The players are going to be rolling their dice and then re-rolling up to 2 times in order to try and get the results they need to complete these various challenges. These can gain you victory points, but they can also reward you with different resources as well, and they can also move you up various tracks out on the main board that can also grant you with different benefits. After all the players have done this, you're going to be moving into the second phase, where players are going to be rolling their dice once more, and then that's going to be determining the actions that you get for this phase, because each of the dice icons are going to be associated with a different action, and it's going to allow you to do different things like move around on the board, use a location-specific action, or even gain different tokens that you can use to issue rerolls or even make a die a certain value in the future. But in this phase, there's going to be a bunch of different battles and encounters that players can engage in, and these are either going to be triggered by visiting a particular location or by committing dice to one of the encounters, and once a certain amount of dice are committed to those encounters, that encounter is going to trigger. The cool thing about this is that players are going to be gaining victory points based on their contributions to that encounter, and if you're committing dice, it's going to be guaranteeing you certain symbols when that counter actually resolves. But if you were the one to trigger that encounter, then your opponents are going to be able to roll their dice first, and then you get to decide how much of their dice you want to commit to that card. Ideally, you're committing the least amount of your opponent's dice as possible because, like I said, the amount that they contribute is going to be dictating the amount of victory points they get. But this doesn't mean that you don't want their help, because after you've decided how many dice you want to take from your opponents, you're then going to be trying to roll your dice to complete all the remaining icons. And if you're not able to do so, then you've completely failed that encounter, and the next player gets the opportunity to try and complete it. But the last action that players can perform with their dice is just to gain some gold, and this is really nice to have because at the end of each round you're going to be able to purchase additional dice into your pool by spending your gold, which is going to increase your odds of getting what you need in all your future dice rolls. But the game continues like this, and players are going to be moving up various tracks out on the board depending on their accomplishments, and this is going to be earning them different bonuses and victory points at the end of the game. And then you're going to be tallying all this up, and the player with the most victory points at that point wins the game. And if you are interested in this one, you can check it out, and I will have it linked in the description below. And you can follow along to get notified and also get a free gift added to your pledge. Also on the 30th, we have Cogs and Carts, and this one is a competitive abstract strategy game. And it's also one of the more innovative ones that I've seen in a while, because the way that this game works is that there's actually going to be a bunch of wooden cogs out on the board, and these all start face down at the beginning of the game. And then each player is going to be placing their minecart on one of the 4 locations in the center of the board. The goal of the game is to try and collect as many of these diamonds as you can, but at the start of the game, all these diamonds are going to be scattered around the perimeter of the board, and there's only ever going to be 3 on the board at a given time. Each of the diamonds has a number on its back, and any time that a diamond gets added to the board, it's going to have to be moved that many spaces away from its starting location. Players will then be taking turns manipulating the board, moving their minecarts, and trying to pick up as many diamonds as possible. And the way this works is that on their turn, the first thing they can do is rotate the cogs any amount by spinning one of the cogs out on the board. This is going to be rotating everything and changing the paths that the carts could potentially go on. The next thing you can do is flip any one of the empty face down cogs to its opposite side and orient it in any way that you like. Finally, you can move your cart along any of the paths that currently connect to the cog that you're located on. You're going to be picking up any diamonds that you cross through, and then immediately adding any diamond that you want from the perimeter of the board onto the board, following those same placement rules as before. And the minecart's going to continue on its path until it either hits an unflipped cog, or if it falls off the edge of the board. If that happens, it's not really a big deal. It just means that your minecart has to come back onto the board from its same location on your following turn. Once all the diamonds have been collected, the player with the most diamonds at the end of the game wins the game. And if you are interested to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description below, and of course you can click to get notified. Also on the 30th, we have AI 100% Human, and this one is a tableau builder where players are going to be drafting cards and then building out their tableau to try and score the most victory points. Each player starts the game with an AI card that's going to grant them with some additional scoring opportunities, but this is going to be the first card that goes into your tableau. Each player is then going to be dealt 4 cards, and they're going to be choosing 2 to keep. And then each player is going to be dealt 7 cards, where they're going to be going through a drafting phase where they're going to be choosing 1 and then passing the rest to the next player, and then continuing until all those cards have been drafted. But the thing that makes this drafting a little bit different than most games is that every time you draft a card, you're also going to be playing one of the cards that you've currently taken into your tableau. This creates a really interesting situation where your hand's going to be made up of those 2 cards that you chose at the beginning of the round, unless you've already used them. and then the rest of your hand's going to be made up of whichever cards were passed to you for that specific turn. But each of these cards are going to have different effects and ways that they score, and every time that you put a card into your tableau, you're going to be scoring it according to its scoring requirements. The round continues like this until all the cards that are being passed around and drafted are used up, and then you're going to be moving into the second phase that plays exactly like the first one. But at the end of each round, there's going to be some additional scoring opportunities because at the start of the game, there's going to be a couple objective cards that were put out on the board, one for each phase, and then at the end of those phases, players are also going to be checking for those conditions and potentially earning more victory points for that phase. After that second phase, the end of the game is triggered, and then the player with the most victory points at that point wins the game, and if you want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. Also on the 30th, we have a second edition and a new expansion for the game Keystone North America, and the new expansion is the Coastal expansion. This is going to be introducing 28 new species into the game that can be found along the lakes and rivers and oceans within North America, and they're going to be offering all sorts of new possibilities within your ecosystem, but there's also going to be a bunch of new cards and new skill tokens and mechanisms added in this game with the expansion as well. And if you are interested to know exactly how this game plays, it is a game that I did cover in the past, and I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now, but if you are interested in it, you can check it out. I'll have it linked in the description down below. And in this game, players are going to be taking on the role of biologists, building an interconnected ecosystem through tile placement. This game offers multiple ways to play. You can go head-to-head against your friends in a multiplayer and see who builds the healthiest ecosystem. But this game also offers a solo and co-op campaign narrative adventure that will take you on a fully illustrated journey across North America. Players will be solving different puzzles, learning about the animals and the ecosystems that make up this area of the world. Players are going to be trying to get the most points by creating a healthy ecosystem by laying different tiles of species, chaining together those that share an environment. You'll then be able to research the species that you introduce to your environment in order to unlock new options and special abilities. Players will also be trying to complete different objectives in order to score even more points, and this is also a game that looks like it has quite a few ratings on Boardgame Geek, which is always nice to see, and there's a lot of comments here as well if you want to check out what other people had to say. Also on the 30th, we have Farmosa Tea, and this one is a competitive worker placement game where players are going to be growing different types of tea, processing them, and then shipping them to where they need to be to hopefully make the most victory points at the end of the game. This one literally came in while I was filming the video, so I don't really know much more about this one than what I'm showing you right now. So if you do want to know more about this one, you will have to check out the campaign, unfortunately, because I just don't have enough time to look into this one in more detail. And launching on May 1st, we have Cosmic Chains, and this one is a dueling card game where players are competing to build the longest chain of satellite cards by the end of the game. And the way these cards work is that they do come in different types, with certain types of cards only being able to connect to certain other types of cards. And you do want these cards side by side by the end of the game in order to create the longest chain as possible, but you don't actually have to play them in this order, and they don't have to be side by side throughout the game. You just really want to make sure that those valid connections are in place at the end of the game so you can score all those cards. Each player starts the game with their own deck of cards, and you're going to be drawing 3 cards into your hand to start, and then anytime that you play a card, you're going to be drawing another card into your hand so that you always have 3 cards to choose from. The game also offers a couple expansion modules that you can choose to play with, like the superpower tokens, where each player is going to be dealt 3 of those at the beginning of the game, and these offer one-time use abilities. And then there's also the space debris module, where players are going to be drafting an additional 3 cards, and there's going to be 1 visible and 2 hidden, and these are going to be giving you different objectives that you can try to achieve for additional victory points at the end of the game. And this is a game that plays over a series of turns where on your turn you can perform one of 3 possible actions, with the first action being to play a card from your hand into your chain of cards, gaining any instant or ongoing effects. The second option you have is, rather than playing a card into your chain, you can instead activate one of the abilities of the cards that you've already played. This can allow you to destroy cards of your own or your opponent's, swap different cards in different locations, or even copy the actions of other cards. But the third and final option that players have on their turn is to just choose any one of their cards to swap with an adjacent card. And this is nice because if there's any areas of your chain that are broken, you can use this to try and fix those connections. But another thing that is really cool about this is that since each of the players are playing in their own row, but they're both going in the same direction beside each other, your cards are actually considered adjacent to your opponent, so you can actually use this action to swap any of your cards with any of your opponents, so long as they do have a card in that same column. But the game continues like this until all the cards have been played, and then players are going to be counting up their longest chain of cards, earning a victory point for each card in that chain. Then you're going to be adding any from your secret objective or bonus abilities, and then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And if you are interested in this one, you can check it out. I will have it linked in the description down below. Also on the first, we have Peep Spotting, and this one is a competitive game where players are trying to locate an individual across 3 different cards, and 2 of these cards are going to be face up and one's going to be face down, but each of these cards has a whole group of people, and every round you're going to be flipping a character card upward, and whichever player is able to slap their hand on the appropriate card that that character is located in is going to be the one to earn that card, and essentially it acts as a victory point at the end of the game. Because one of the cards is face down, this introduces a little bit of deduction where you want to be absolutely sure that the character is not in either of the other 2 cards before you choose to slap your hand on that one. Each time one of these character cards is taken by correctly locating where they are, you're then going to be revealing the next card in the stack, and the game continues like this until all those cards have been depleted. Then the player with the most character cards at the end of the game wins the game. If you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. Also on the first, we have One Card Maze Season 2, and this is going to be introducing a bunch of new mazes that you can add into your collection, and there are some new ideas here with some easier mazes for younger players, but then also a boss maze that's going to allow players to enter into the boss lair, and you'll have to enter from certain locations at certain points in order to attack the boss, but if you enter in from the wrong location, then the boss is going to be attacking you. But if you don't actually know how this game plays, this is a game that I did cover in the past, and I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this is a game that takes place entirely on a single card, because this card is just going to be a maze that players are going to be trying to solve, but what makes this one really interesting is that each of the doors in these mazes are going to have an arrow associated with them, and you can only pass through that door when the arrow is pointing upward. This means that you're actually going to be rotating and flipping this card in order to try and get the doors into the configuration that you want in order to pass through them when you're at that point in the maze. Players will be able to move through these different areas, but then only be able to flip or rotate the card when they reach certain icons. So if you want to rotate the card to any orientation, you'll have to get to one of these rotate icons. But if you ever get to the edge of the card, you'll actually be able to flip that card over, accessing the other side of the maze, which will have other opportunities to rotate and flip the card and move through different doors. So you're going to be using those in conjunction with each other in order to try and find the end of the maze. So each of these are going to be offering a unique puzzle, and there's going to be 9 different mazes offered in this campaign. Since all of this is just contained on a single card, these are going to be super portable and super easy to take along with you wherever you go. But if you are interested in this and you want to know what kind of challenge they present or what exactly it feels like to play one of these mazes, you can go ahead and sign up on their website, which will get you access to some free mazes that you can try out for yourself, which I think is really awesome of the creator to do that. But if you are interested in this campaign, I will have a link in the description below. And of course, you can click to get notified. Also on the first, we have Micro Midgard, and this one is a competitive Viking-themed game that uses action movement for players to perform their actions. The way this works is that players are going to be taking turns moving one of the meeples out on the central board, and these meeples don't belong to either of the players, so players can utilize any of them, but there are some restrictions here because you can only move a meeple one space to an adjacent space or to the location at the center of the board, but you can't move a meeple to a space where a meeple already occupies, and you also can't move a meeple that either you or your opponent moved on the previous turn. Of course, a Viking game isn't a Viking game without a little bit of destruction, and this comes into play at the start of the game because you're going to be taking the 4 double-sided tokens and then just randomly assigning them to this board on the right here, and this is going to be dictating which of the locations are going to be destroyed as the game progresses and in which order that's going to happen, because as players are taking their actions either on the light side or the dark side of the board, it's going to be moving the associated token up the perimeter of the board, and once either of those tokens reaches their end, it's going to be triggering the end of the round, and then the associated scoring objective is going to be triggered with the other one being discarded, and then also the location adjacent to it on that board is also going to be destroyed. This is really fun because that location is no longer going to be available for the rest of the game, and also players are going to want to try and predict which side that they think is going to be triggering so that they know what conditions they want to achieve in order to gain the most victory points based on that scoring objective. But the different location actions can gain you all sorts of different resources or move you up these various tracks that you can see around the board. And rather than moving up a track, you can always choose to just take the associated bonus based on where your token currently is on that track, but this always resets your token back to the beginning. But the different scoring tokens could grant you victory points depending if you're ahead on certain tracks or if you just have the most of a particular resource. So players are going to want to keep an eye on that and try to predict what they think will be triggered next, and also try to make that happen in order for them to score the most victory points at the end of the game. And the game ends instantly as soon as a single player earns 9 points, or if that final tile is scored, and at that point the player with the most victory points wins. And if you're interested in this one, you can check it out. I will have it linked in the description down below. Also on the first, we have the Long Dark Sea, and this one is a cooperative adventure deck building game. And players are going to be trying to complete certain objectives in order to win a given scenario, but players are going to be starting the game by choosing a main character and a supporting character, which is going to be granting them some special abilities and getting mixed into their deck. And then players are going to have asymmetrical decks to play with in order to use to their advantage to try and complete those objectives. Throughout the game, there's going to be different raid cards that players are going to have to deal with that show up at the top of the board. And there's a bunch of different types of these cards, and I'll explain exactly what they all do in a second here. But if the players don't deal with them, they're going to be continuing to cycle their way through the different rows and causing different havoc and damage to the players. Players are going to be using their explore cards to reveal these cards, and you can see that some of these do have icons on them indicating what might be on the other side of that card. These could be different enemies or locations or even something completely different. The players can play their attack cards in order to deal damage to the enemies, or they can play their defense cards in order to protect against them. And the different locations that will be revealed will also indicate the dice required to roll in order to investigate that location. This is going to move you up certain tracks, but it's also going to progress the story and can cause some positive or negative effects depending on the different types of dice that you have to roll. Because even though you're rolling that set of dice in order to investigate that location, each die that you're forced to roll will also have its own individual effects. What's neat about this game is that each scenario plays over 3 phases, and in between each phase you're actually going to be flipping the board over to the opposite side, and this is going to allow you to spend the resources that you gained in order to modify your decks and improve it for the following phase. The final phase also puts you up against a final boss, and of course if you're able to beat that boss and then also complete your objectives for that scenario, you win the game. And if you are interested to check this one out in more detail, I will have it linked in the description down below. And last one on May 2nd, we have House of Fado, and this is the next game being offered by Vital Lacerda. And before you go and let that scare you away, I just want you to know that this one is not going to be as big and grandiose and complicated as pretty much every single one of his other games, because what he's been trying to do lately is take elements of his more complicated games and then distill them into more of a medium weight game. And that's exactly what he's trying to do with this game here, because this one is supposed to be a lighter version of his previous game known as The Gallerist. And this one borrows the bump action mechanism that's found in The Gallerist, but in this one you're going to be managing your restaurant, attracting customers, and completing different contracts as you promote your musicians and gain prestige for your House of Fado. And if you're not familiar with what Fado is, it's a Portuguese style of music that's often associated with different restaurants, where the restaurant will serve you food like any other restaurant, but it also plays really great music. Unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot more info on this one, but if all of this does sound interesting to you, you can definitely go ahead and check it out, and I will have it linked in the description below. And of course, you can get notified as soon as it launches. And launching on May 2nd, we have the third and final chapter being offered for the game Euthia, which is a sandbox RPG game that can be played in a bunch of different modes, but it does offer a campaign mode as well. Unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot of info on what makes this one different, but it is going to be continuing that story. So if you are a fan of the original, you're probably going to be interested in this one as well. And I did cover the original campaign for this one, so I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. If that sounds interesting, definitely check this one out. I will have it linked in the description down below. And this is a giant sandbox fantasy board game that's inspired by RPG video games. And this new campaign is a reprint of all the existing content. You'll be able to get everything previously released in this campaign, but it's also going to feature a few new additions like the Fierce Powers expansion, which I will get back to in a moment. And if you're unfamiliar with this game, this is a competitive game where players will be exploring a map, uncovering different tiles and quests, and engaging in different battles in order to gain the most reputation and win the game. At the start of the game, players will choose their characters, each with their own unique playstyle and skill tree for players to explore and unlock as the game goes forward. And depending on the scenario that players chose to play, the game will unfold in different ways, potentially engaging in multiple battles with that final dragon throughout the entirety of the game. Each round, the players are going to be taking turns performing actions, and in order to perform your actions, you're going to have a few action tokens on your own personal player board, and you're going to be using those to move around on the board or perform different location-based actions like mining for resources on the tile that you're currently located on, or trading if you're in a town, or engaging in combat if there's enemies, or completing any quests that you have the opportunity to discover. Each player's board will also have different areas to track things like health, your weapon upgrades, any potions, or abilities that you have unlocked throughout the game. Players are going to be using dice rolling in order to engage in combat in this game, and each monster is going to have a card associated with it, and depending on the amount of damage that you inflict on that monster, it's going to trigger a response, and then potentially inflict damage back on the player. This is where your weapons and armor and potions come in really handy, because this will allow you to manipulate your dice rolls, and also defend on potentially incoming attacks. The game continues like this until the scenario is completed, and then the player that has the most victory points at the end of the game is going to win the game. And there is a ton of different ways to gain victory points, but of course the most exciting way is by inflicting a ton of damage on that dragon. And of course the game comes with some beautiful miniatures for all the monsters and characters, and all the different scenarios will offer a ton of variety both in gameplay as well as difficulty. The new expansion is going to be adding 4 new scenarios, a brand new hero that uses animal companions who she can control using her powers. There's going to be new cards, new weapons, new monsters, and an additional type of elementals. There's going to be new map tiles and new abilities for each of the 6 heroes as well. And as always, if you are interested in this one, definitely follow along with it because it'll get you the Griffin Mini expansion absolutely for free. And if you did back the original game, you also get a €10 discount on this campaign for being a returning backer. And I almost forgot to mention that this one is also our Discord pick of the week, so give in to that peer pressure and check this one out. On May 3rd, we have full Sauna, and this one is really interesting because this one's actually a competitive tableau builder, but players are actually all sharing the same tableau. The way this works is that players are going to be playing different character cards into the sauna, with each of those characters having a different effect. It could be changing the temperature of the sauna, or adding or removing certain visitors, or having all sorts of other effects as well. But each one of these characters will also score according to their own particular conditions. They might score depending on how long they're in the sauna, or being next to or not next to certain other characters or any characters at all. Or also they might score depending on what the current temperature is. But the game does add a few more layers on top of the tableau building because players are going to be building up their queue of cards, and then they're going to be bidding for turn order each and every round so that they can start adding their queue of cards into the sauna first. Or not first, depending on where you want to be in that queue. The game also incorporates a good amount of humor, and it did get a chuckle out of me, so definitely check this one out if it sounds interesting to you and you're looking for a laugh. And of course, I will have this linked in the description down below. And launching on May 5th, we have Cuántos Tacos, and this one is a competitive game where players are competing to complete different taco recipes, and this one is also a campaign that I did cover in the past, but they pulled it down to make some tweaks and improvements, and they completely changed the whole look and feel of the game, and I'm sure there's been a few other tweaks to the campaign as well. So if you do want to see what makes this one different than the last time I covered it, definitely go ahead and check out the link to the campaign in the description below, but I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. This one is a dice rolling game where players are going to be rolling dice in order to try and gain ingredients to complete different taco cards, which will score you victory points for the end of the game. The game plays over a series of rounds, and there's always going to be an active player every round, and then it's that player that gets to roll the dice. They'll be able to roll those dice and then re-roll them a number of times Yahtzee style to try and get the combinations that they're looking for. But even though just one player gets to roll the dice each round, all the players are going to be using the icons on those dice to try and complete the different cards that they have in their hand. If you complete a card, it's going to be granting you victory points, but some of these cards can even have some bonus ingredients that if you're able to get those as well, then it will earn you some additional victory points on top of the core victory points that that card offers. Players will be using a dry erase marker to keep track of their progress across their different cards, and whenever you do complete a card, you'll be able to lock that one in for its victory points and then draw a new one into your hand. The game plays over a number of rounds, and then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And if you want to know more about this one, you can check it out. I have it linked in the description below. And this next one is also launching on the 5th, but it literally came in while I was filming this video, so I haven't had a chance to dig into this one in too much detail. This one looks like a competitive party strategy game where players are either trying to save or destroy the world that you live in. And you're going to be using their powerful magic and military in order to fight against your opponents. It's really late and I don't have time to check this one out, but if you do want to learn more, I will have a link to the campaign in the description down below. That's everything I have for you this week, but don't leave yet because we've still got a couple awesome giveaways to announce, and these are the easiest giveaways to enter ever. All you got to do is leave a comment. You don't have to like or subscribe or do anything like that. And the first giveaway we have is for a pledge for Earth, as well as the new Abundance expansion. If you're not familiar with this game, this is a tableau builder, but it's also a game where players are going to be choosing actions, and then all the players get to take a smaller version of that action on the same turn. So there's not going to be a lot of downtime in this game, and each card that you add into your tableau is going to be scoring in different ways depending on what other cards are around it. And anytime that you perform a action, each action is associated with a different color, and that's going to be activating all the cards in your tableau that also match that color. The new expansion is going to be adding a few new ideas into the game, with the big one being the new seed resource, which actually acts like a bit of a wild resource that you can use in a bunch of different ways. You can exchange it for other resources that you need, or also use it to help get the cards that you need for your tableau the most into your hands. I think this one's a fantastic design, and it's a game that I often compare to Wingspan because I think they do share some similarities. So if you do like Wingspan, you'll probably like this one as well. But if you want a chance to see for yourself, you can just go ahead and enter this giveaway. But one thing to note with this one is that it is only offered in North America. So for everyone else, don't worry, I will have one more giveaway in a second here. But to enter this giveaway, all you got to do is leave a comment. But instead of leaving it on this video, I actually want you to go ahead and check out Grant Lyon's video that he just posted recently, because he did just hit 10,000 subscribers, and he put out a really fun video with all sorts of other content creators that you are definitely familiar with. And I'll leave a link to this video in the description, as well as a pinned comment so you can find it easily. But just go ahead and leave a comment on his video with the hashtag Earth, and I'll pull from those comments next week to see which one of you is the winner. Is for Firesiege, and this one is a cooperative tower defense style game where players are going to be using their actions to put up walls and take down walls and try to prevent these different monsters from making their way to the center of the board. Of course, other than just manipulating the flow of the monsters, you can also directly attack them and try to eliminate them from the board. But what's really interesting about this game is the way that the cooperative experience works, because each player is going to have a hand of cards with a certain action on the side that they can see. Then there's going to be different actions on the opposite side. And the other players can't tell you exactly what actions are on the other side, but they can let you know which ones they really like you to use and which ones they would not like you to use. You're going to have to weigh that information with the actions that you see on your side to see which one is likely the best card that you want to play. And this giveaway is going to be for the base pledge, which is going to be available to all of North America, Europe, as well as the UK. So if you're in any of those locations, feel free to enter in on this giveaway. And we'll also run this one over on that same video from Grant Lyon, so go ahead and check that one out. And then for this giveaway, just leave a comment with the hashtag FIRE. And if you're entering in both these giveaways, you can use both those hashtags in a single comment. It's not going to increase or limit your odds in any way. Good luck in the giveaways, but now let's go ahead and draw the winners for last week's giveaways. And we had a pledge for Castle Up, as well as Knight the Avalon RPG. And a draw winner, I use this fancy application here. All these extra names down here are bonus entries for my Ko-fi subscribers. And if you do like this sort of content, you want to help make all these efforts just a little bit more sustainable for me, I don't charge any publishers for any of this content, and I don't get paid or any free copies. So all my support does come from Ko-fi and the little bit of money I make from these YouTube videos. But if you do want to make all these efforts a little bit more sustainable, it does mean a lot to me, and it does make a massive difference. And it also gets you extra entries into these giveaways, which is not a bad thing. And I will admit, I haven't posted much on Ko-fi this month, so I'll try to make it up to everyone that's on there and maybe put out a special video or something like that. I hope I can find the time. I have a couple ideas and I want to give it a shot, so I'll see what I can do. But for now, let's just go ahead and draw the winner for Castle Up. So let's go ahead and draw those comments. and draw a winner. And the winner is Samurai Kitty, which is one of our Ko-fi subscribers. So congratulations on the win. I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a sweet pledge here, or you can just go ahead and email me at adam@shelfclutter.com or just message me on Ko-fi. The giveaway for the Night RPG was run over on the Discord, and I always do run those one extra day. So if you are watching this soon enough, there might still be time to enter in that giveaway, and it'll be drawn really, really soon here. And that'll just automatically message whoever wins. And you can just reach out to me on Discord or email me at adam@shelfclutter.com. And we'll get that one sorted out as well. That is everything I have for you this week. Finally, I don't know where all these games came from, and I have no idea how long this video actually is. If you managed to sit through the whole thing, you are a true champion. There's definitely a ton of games this week that I'm super interested in. I thought the Cogs and Carts game was pretty cool. I want to look into Keystone a little bit more because I think that just looks beautiful, and I don't remember exactly how that game plays. Micro Midgard looks like a ton of fun, and I definitely want to learn more on the House of Fado. But yeah, the Epochs game is the one that I'm the most hopeful for, but because of the size of that game, I really would like to try that one before I fully commit to it, so I hope they do either have Tabletopia or Tabletop Simulator. Maybe I can get a play on that one before I actually commit to it. But as always, thanks so much for tuning in. And if there's any games that you're interested in, feel free to let me know in the description below. I'm always interested to know what other people think. And until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full. Oh.